Today, I'd like to talk to you about RAII. You see, the challenge we face at the moment is that whilst there's a tremendous amount of investment in generative AI, there's a lot of challenge in trying to find the right use cases that deliver that return on investment. They are there for sure. Alphabet, for example, uses generative AI around our SAP system, and we save hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And the reason that this problem exists is because it's not always obvious where those use cases sit. And the best way to understand this is if we step back for a second and we think about the different types of artificial intelligence that exist. So the first type is artificial narrow intelligence. Think of that like we're automating a task. And we've been using that for years. Everything from the mapping software that we have on our phones to the Alexas that we have in our homes. These help us automate a specific task. Now, what I actually find particularly not useful is when we talk about artificial general intelligence. And this is the rhetoric we tend to see when we open up the news. The AI is going to take over. It can do anybody's job. And really what we're talking about here is how artificial intelligence can automate the tasks that an individual does. And therefore, that individual doesn't need to do that job anymore. Now, whilst there's some degree of truth in that, if I have a highly repetitive task, I'm doing the same thing day in, day out, then yes, it's mundane, it's repetitive. AI loves mundane and repetitive, and potentially your role could be changed by this. But for the most of us, we don't do that. In most roles within inside of an organization, there are parts of our role that's repetitive, but on the whole, it's a vast degree of tasks that we have to perform. Now, the reality is this future of artificial general intelligence is not here yet, and I wager that I may not see it in my lifetime. So whilst it's interesting and fun, it's not useful to us. Now, things have progressed dramatically in the last couple of years, and we've moved beyond artificial narrow intelligence. It's true, the AI is capable of a lot more, but it's what I would call artificial jagged intelligence, where, you could get it to potentially automate an entire process, but there's some things that it's just not good at. Let me give you an example. The other day, I had a conversation with a customer. We came up with a really cool project. Within 20 minutes of putting the phone down and talking to Gemini, I had Gemini create a project charter. From that project charter, it created a presentation. Inside the presentation, I used Nano Banana to create some custom images. And then finally, I put it into Google Vids to create a video explainer. Within 20 minutes, I went from an idea to a video explainer for the project. I uploaded that into a chat group. And within 2 hours, I found someone that was willing to fund the project. Now, that never would have happened in the old world of AI. It would have taken me months to even kind of explain the project to a group of people. But in a few minutes, I can do something quite dramatic. And I was gushing at how cool AI is. And one of my colleagues pointed out to me an interesting fact. If you go to any of the large language vendors, as I write this or talk to you today, and ask them to simply generate an image of a map of the US or the map of the UK, you will be surprised. And I thought it was how you prompted it that was my mistake, but it's not. It has difficulty doing that. And so we have this notion where something that would be pretty simple to us is difficult to it. And something that is incredibly difficult for us is simple to it. And actually, that's kind of the appeal, I think, that, we can use the AI to augment what we do and not replace what we do. But that is artificial jagged intelligence. And therein lies the problem. The question is, if I've got a use case, good at doing it, or is it going to be bad at doing it? So RAII stands for Return on Artificial Intelligence Investment. Yeah, I know I ignored the O. And yes, you won't find this in any marketing material from Google. This is sort of an internal little shorthand that we're using as we start to think about how we develop return on investment models around AI. Now, what I want to do with the next few moments is just to sort of share some lessons learned on where we think the return is, and then some tips on how to go and discover that with inside your organization, some steps, if you like, to go through. So the first thing I want to ground us on is this notion that someone's job will be taken away with AI. It's not what the data is actually showing. Well, the data is showing, and if I look at the Harvard report, which involved Procter and Gamble, is a good example of this, is they saw that an individual's role or task was optimized by about 17%. That's the red box on the left here. And that's good, don't get me wrong. For some software engineering tasks, it could be as much as 30%. But there's a big opportunity here. And it's this long tail of opportunity. And what the studies also identified was that the AI created a 200% increase in effectiveness. Now, if you think about a business process, there is what you call the Pareto Rule. And what that basically says is I spend 80% of my time with the top 20% of, fill in the gap, customers, suppliers, projects, inventory, whatever, doesn't matter what it is. In every business process, the Pareto Rule exists. And so what if you could train an agent to go after the other 80%? That's that long tail that you see on the screen right now. What if I can train them to augment what I do and go look for opportunities in the other 80% of customers, in the other 80% of suppliers, in the other 80% of projects, etc.? That is a massive opportunity for an organization. So, given that, what do I do to look for that long tail of opportunity? Well, the first thing I want to say is there is no shortage of good ideas. For example, what you're seeing on your screen right now is a business process that I have with inside Google. I've uploaded a PDF of that process, nice little clever prompt, and Gemini will spit out all of the ways that I could optimize that process with artificial intelligence. And look, it's done some beautiful research across the internet to come up with some brilliant use cases. And you know what? We can also look at some things that other people have done. So for example, here I'm embedded Gemini within inside a spreadsheet. And so I can start to, in this case, be a bit of a tax advisor. So in this case, I'm trying to identify whether water is tax deductible or not. And if it's in the office, no, but if it's in a data center, yes. The other cool things that I can do with AI is I can start to generate my own application. So this is an expense app. So something I have to do maybe every day is answer questions, or I look at, I go through expense reports and I find things that people have put on their expense reports that shouldn't be there. The expense policy is cumbersome to read. You can't really do that when you're sat at a train station and you're trying to think whether you can buy something or not. And so why not build an app? And so that's what's happening here. Gemini is going to build an app that allows somebody to check their expenses. And that could be something I could distribute to all of the users that come to me and ask questions. And I could really prevent maybe auditing challenges with expenses. Maybe that's my role ahead of the curve. So there are tremendous things that we can do, wonderful ideas that we can deliver with inside an organization. So given the fact there's lots of ideas and plenty to go chase that long tail of opportunity, what's the next thing that I really need to ask myself? So the first question I'd ask myself is this really an AI problem? Now, I run lots of workshops with companies, and it's actually quite surprising. If there was 20 ideas in the room, it's likely that 10 of them aren't actually AI related. They probably have a problem with the underlying ERP system or underlying data within inside the organization. For the other 10, half will be AI problems, but it's important to distinguish between a problem that's a machine learning problem, and that usually starts with the sentence, I'd like to predict, I would like to forecast, I would like to, you get the idea. They tend to be machine learning problems versus generative AI and agentic issues, which are tending to be more automation related. So when you're thinking of an AI agent problem, for example, it's good to have a model of what fits into that category. There are lots of ways to do this. You just need to pick one that you feel is right for your organization. One of the ways that we often do this is we think about the definition of an agent. And an agent is something that reasons, it acts, it observes, it plans, it collaborates, and ideally it self-refines. And if we can't look at this use case and say that it does one or more of these things, ideally all of these things, then I need to stop and ask the question, does this really make sense as an AI use case? The other thing we need to ask is, where should I focus? So I've got a great set of use cases. I've identified they really are agentic problems, but what should I do? Now, my advice would be to look at what other people have done, because it gives us an indication that there was a return on investment there. One of the things we've done here at Google with inside the SAP team is to aggregate a bunch of sources of projects and even products that have been delivered with an agentic AI flavor around SAP business processes, and we put them into a database so we can heat map them. We can see for a process or an application what is popular and where other folks have focused their energy and effort. Now, once I've done that, I've now got a group of use cases that I could focus in on. There are two things that I need to consider at this point. The first thing is, what is the cultural impact? What I mean by that is, do I do a project that impacts multiple people, may have a big benefit to the whole organization, where I've got to get everybody involved, or do I do a project that only a small group can work through? Again, the AI can help us. We can put a description of the project into the AI, and we can help it understand, or help us understand, what would the impact be across the organization? What are the changes that I've got to do with inside the business that are going to make this successful? For example, if people are somewhat cynical about AI in that department, and we're asking them to trust the AI to make a decision as a black box, that might not fly. And so we really have to think about these cultural changes. The other thing we need to think about is technical friction. Now, technical friction comes in all sorts of different ways. Principally, the biggest technical friction is that data is not in the right state in an organization. And many people will tell you, oh, you've got to get your data all in one place. That's not necessarily true. AI, particularly generative AI, just needs it to be well described. It just needs to be able to understand what the data means. The field names need to be descriptive. It needs semantic, which means a description of the data that's in the data. And so that's more important than piling it all together. And there are other things, like agents are extremely unpredictable in terms of traffic and load. So our underlying systems need to be able to handle that, or we need to protect it from that. There's nothing worse than an agent going in a runaway mode and taking all of your systems down across the organization. Then we need to look, do we have a measurable process? So what I mean by that is, does this fit into a bigger corporate strategy about the way we look at AI? So one of the interesting things about Alphabet, and this is an example of how we look at it, is we try and encourage innovation. We encourage people to kind of think of new ideas, and we find them coming from all parts of the organization. It's not necessarily top down. It isn't necessarily bottom up. Often managers that have done this role for years, who really know the role inside and out, and that maybe can articulate where the AI might be able to help, are the best place. And we need to take their experiments and we need to lock them into an overriding process that says, does this idea that Matthew have scale? Is it something that everybody might have as a problem in the organization? And then how does that fit into our over organizational goals? And if it fits those two things, then let's invest in it. Let's scale that idea up to be wide. The final thing I would say is join a community. There are lots of communities out there that you can join. I would highly recommend communities that are specific to your industry rather than technology communities. So think about joining some group that's talking about AI, that's maybe interested in manufacturing, whatever you do. Maybe you manufacture buttons, maybe you're in financial close. Get into the community that's not necessarily talking about cool models, that the vernacular is more, I have this business problem, have you found an AI tool that can solve it? So there you have it. There are a few things that we can do that are quite simple, that will really hone us in to finding our RAII, our return on investment. And it's important that we do that, because the worst thing we can do from an AI point of view is spend a lot of time on a cool project that really doesn't go anywhere, doesn't help us in terms of the perception of AI in the organization, and it certainly doesn't help the organization itself. I'd love to learn about your AI projects and what's working well for you. Please share the next one.